Hey everybody, how's it going? James Introcaso here. Before we get going, I wanted to let you know all about a great deal from one of our sponsors for Tabletop Babble. I'm talking about BarkBox. If you go to getbarkbox.com/DSPN, that's getbarkbox.com/DSPN, you can get an amazing monthly subscription of awesome dog stuff for your dog. Holidays are coming up. Did you forget your furry friend? Well, guess what? You don't need to forget them anymore. All you need to do is go to getabarkbox.com/DSPN, get a great discount on your order, get something awesome for your dog every single month. You will feel like an amazing dog parent to your dog. So go check it out right now. Let BarkBox do the work for you. You take the credit with the pup. Go to getabarkbox.com/DSPN to get a free month of BarkBox right now. That's a free month at getabarkbox.com/DSPN. Happy holidays. This is Tabletop Babble. I'm James Introcaso. This week on the show, we're continuing our discussion of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons monster design with some great designers. This time it's a new panel, but all of them have worked on the Creature Codex for 5th edition from Kobold Press. It is a sequel to the Tome of Beasts. And who is on this panel? Why, none other than Wolfgang Baur, the Kobold-in-Chief of Kobold Press himself, along with amazing game designers Richard Green and Jeremy Hochhalter. Let's get right into my conversation with them. Okay, everybody, I am here now with 3 amazing game designers who are going to talk to us a little bit about how they make beasts that can terrify players all over the world. And first up is a person who is no stranger to our audience, Wolfgang Baur. Wolfgang, who are you and what do you do in the world of tabletop role-playing games?
Oh, I am the Kobold-in-Chief over at Kobold Press, and I publish any number of things for 5th edition, and I design them, and I work with others, and then I tell the world about it. So that's me. I'm the publisher at Kobold Press.
Excellent, excellent. Yes, makers of some of the finest RPG products around. So I have Kobold books left and right all over my shelf and in my PDF libraries, and I think I might own more Kobold books than anything else, actually.
Great.
So, yeah, really, really awesome to have you here. And also with us is Jeremy Hochhalter. Jeremy, who are you and what do you do in the world of tabletop role-playing games?
Oh, well, let's see. I play a lot, which is always fun, but monsters are my favorite. So creating monsters for people like Wolfgang and Kobold has been amazing. But I also have I'm going to call it a nano publishing company because I have one anthology out so far. But through that, I'm also doing created content for the Adventurers League, which is always fun.
That's excellent. Well, it is great to have you here. And we're going international on this episode, all the way from the UK. We've got the one and only Richard Green. Who are you and what do you do in the world of tabletop role-playing games?
Well, I also play a lot and DM a lot, but I'm a freelance designer. I've done stuff for Kobold Press for nearly 10 years now, I think, off and on. And I've done some work on the Midgard campaign setting, and now I've done some work on Creature Codex. And I've also written and published my own campaign setting, Pars Antium City at the Crossroads, and some supplements for that.
So I think it's safe to say we have some people who know a thing or two about game design on this panel, which is why we're here. We're going to talk about designing monsters today, and we're also going to be talking about the Creature Codex, which is a already funded, still ongoing Kickstarter from Kobold Press. It is the companion book to the Tome of Beasts, which is my most beloved monster book for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, my most beloved monster book ever, perhaps. Yes, it is a great big book filled with hundreds of monsters and all kinds of great story bits. Every single monster has multiple ways to work into the story. It ties directly to the amazing Midgard campaign setting, but you can also drop these monsters in any 5th edition game. There's a wide variety, and it has all of the goodness that we've come to know and love from Kobold Press. So I am really excited about this. I'm a backer for this Kickstarter. You all have made monsters for this Kickstarter. It is already over 300% funded. So we're just breaking through stretch goals at this point, which is amazing.
Oh, yeah.
So let's jump in. When you're designing monsters for a game like 5th edition D&D that already has a bunch of monsters, let's just say, right, we've got the monster manual, we know we've got Volo's Guide to Monsters, and now we also have the Tome of Beasts. How do you create something that is fresh and original when there's already probably between those 3 books, right, 1,000 monsters out there? So Wolfgang, why don't you start us off?
I've been a monsterholic for many years, dating back to those 2nd edition days when there were the loose leaf binders full of monsters. I've always dealt with very large quantities of monsters because I believe more is better. But over time, what I'm looking for from them has moved in 2 directions. One is it needs to be interesting enough for people to pick up and actually want to put in their game, right? I don't want it to be super niche. When I was writing for TSR in the 90s, I wrote a bunch of monsters that I go back to now and I say, wow, that's a really great monster for about one adventure, right? And it doesn't work anywhere else. So I've tried to make one of the goals for Creature Codex and Tome of Beasts was make sure they're generic enough that they fit in a lot of places. The other well that I go to personally, and other designers do this differently, is I go to world mythology at least as a springboard. And this time around, I spent a lot of time with Filipino stuff, looking at the Burbalang and Aswang, and I don't know what all it was in there. And then I spent a lot of time on Sumerians and Babylonians and angels and powers and dominions, all sorts of, what gets your creative juices flowing. And for me, that's hey, I'll pick up this book of Palestinian folklore and see if there are any cool monsters in it. Often that gets me started. What happens then, of course, is I say, well, this folkloric monster is awfully similar to these other folkloric monsters that already exist in the game or that people have seen 6 times. How could I make it both more generically useful and playable and put a different spin on it?
Sure. I think getting out of your white guy comfort zone, if you are a white guy and a game designer, which many of us tend to be, right?
Well, I love European stuff. It's just I'm so jaded after 20 years of game design, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's hard to find something that hasn't been done before. So going to other mythologies, which are just as cool and rich and, go just as far back, if not further.
Oh, yeah. Oh, Tome of Beasts is loaded with, there's some things out of Polish myth and legend. There's a bunch of Slavic things, all of which aren't that familiar if you didn't grow up with a, Polish grandmother telling you stories or Russian grandfather saying Baba Yaga's going to get you. We didn't grow up with that mythos, but it's really compelling and powerful.
Those are some of the ones I've picked from the list to design. Have been some of those sort of different mythologies. I've done a sort of Fey trickster from Native American myth. I hadn't heard of it before, but it was on the spreadsheet, and I thought I'll have a look at that one. Did a bit of research into it. Thought that's going to be a really cool one to design. So I think those getting into some of those interesting world myths has been really interesting.
And is that, Richard, when you're looking to make something that is new and fresh, do you sit down and do you sort of start with the research for those creatures, or?
Yeah, for those ones, I definitely have done. I've done a lot of research, and I think quite often the stories conflict, and you'll find 5 or 6 different stories about this being, and then you can then look at which ones are different to monsters that already exist, and kind of say, well, I'm going to hone in on these 2 or 3 things for this creature, because that's what makes it different to, I don't know, other undead creatures or other demons or whatever. It's these 2 things that really make it stand out. Because I think a good monster has got to have something really unique and memorable about it. And it could be a special ability, or it could just be something weird that it does that players are going to think afterwards, oh yeah, I'm going to remember that guy because he did that, So I think that's really important, something unique and memorable.
So this came up during the part 1 monster design podcast, which was, it's awesome to find these unique abilities, but don't feel like you need to go overboard. And you sort of alluded to that when you said 1 or 2 abilities, right? That you don't need to come up with 6 new mechanics for every single monster. Sometimes it's a blending of things that haven't been blended together before. Sometimes it's one really cool, memorable thing. Sometimes it's a really cool story point that they eat babies, right?
That's a popular story point. That gets around.
It does.
Everything eats babies in world myths.
A lot of monsters don't last more than 2 or 3 rounds, 4 rounds on the table. So 2 or 3 abilities is usually enough, I think, for most of them. Maybe not legendary creatures and big boss monsters, but most of the time they're not going to get to use 5, 6 abilities.
That is a really good thing to think about. How long is your monster actually going to interact on the battlefield or with the players, right? What about you, Jeremy? When you are approaching monster design, how do you make sure your monsters are fresh and creative and original?
I kind of have to echo what they said as far as, making sure that you have something new and fresh and original, but you don't necessarily need to get rid of things that are already there. You can always just reflavor it. So like creatures that have their 2 claws and their bite, you just switch it up to be something that's, mentally in your imagination, something that looks cooler so you can explain it to your players that way. And I think that keeps things that are done over and over feeling fresher.
Oh, yeah.
And as far as inspiration, all you have to do is look at the real world, and we have so much out there that is just, it's stranger than fiction. So that always keeps me going.
Oh yeah, strange animals are one that I go to once in a while. There's stuff out there. The one I saw just today or yesterday was some species of crocodile that pokes its ribs out through its skin as a defense mechanism. And I'm looking at this thing, and I'm like, what? Seriously? And apparently, it's a strange little crocodilian lizardy thing. And it's got like spiky bits going through. And I'm like, could it be any more D&D than this, right? It's reptilian and it's got spikes. And I don't know if it'll ever turn into a monster I write up, but it was kind of neat to see what looked like a land-based creature that is a sort of hedgehog meets sea urchin meets dragon. Those things are great when you can find them. The same thing with the horned toad that shoots blood out of its eyes, right? I had one.
Oh, wow, that's good.
I had one as a pet. They're from the American Southwest. And of course, as a boy, I was like, cool, I've got this horned toad. It's awesome. How do I make it shoot blood out of its eyes? Well, it only does that as a defense mechanism. So you really have to poke it with a stick to get there. And I probably have to confess I was not very kind to the horned toad the first day or two till I saw it. And I went, oh, okay, great. Now I got to clean it up.
It's true. And there is a lot of, I did work for National Geographic for a long time. And man, there is some scary stuff in our real world, or just some bizarre stuff too, right? Jellyfish that are far larger than jellyfish have any business being, and that sort of thing. That I think you can draw for some great real world inspiration, and that makes it super fun, and then also digging into these legends. There were some weird things on this list. Wolfgang, when you had sent the list to me, there was a creature called the Gulan that I thought, oh, this sounds interesting. I'll check it out. And man, did it turn out to be way weirder and more disgusting than I ever thought. So I will just leave it at that, because I don't know if it even made it into the book. It was so weird and disgusting.
Well, we haven't gotten through playtest yet. Playtest starts January, right? So that's where some of this actually what we do kind of meets the reality of, does it work at the table, right? Is we have a list of ideas and concepts, and some of them are from myths and some of them are original. We just dream up weirdness and we put it all in one big pile. It's like, okay, there's 300 monsters. Let's go test them. And then players come back and say, yeah, that thing is weird and creepy. It's so weird and creepy that I didn't like running it, or, it was confusing, or it has too many abilities, or whatever it is, the feedback comes in. And most of the time it's fixable, right? It's too easy, it's too hard, whatever. But once in a while, we just say, yeah, that was a terrible idea. We axe it. We just cut it.
Yeah, of course. And that's all part of the game design process, right? Something could be really cool, or a monster could work with a totally different mechanical design. And it's like, well, we overhaul this. Tome of Beast 3, this will be in, right? Not that I'm promising Tome of Beast 3 to anyone. Not...
You go ahead and promise.
Not just yet.
I'm trying to get through Creature Codex.
But is the playtesting of creatures something that is available to backers? Because that is a really fun thing. And I find playtesting a couple of creatures is a lot easier than playtesting an adventure, because you can use the current campaign you're playing and just drop those creatures in.
Yeah, we've gotten smart about our playtest. Ben McFarland is the one who did the wrangling on creature playtest for Tome of Beast, and he's doing it again for Creature Codex. Our technique is basically, backers, would you like to playtest? And the ones who say yes, basically sign up on a Google spreadsheet, tell us what level monsters or what level campaign players they have now. And we send them, a handful, a few creatures that kind of fit in with their level most of the time, and they run 3, 4, 5 monster encounters, write it up, send it back. I mean, if we get a report from you, you get credited in the book as a playtester, because really we're quite thankful to people who give it a shot and tell us, hey, this was fine, or we had a good time, but we had to run it twice because the first one was a TPK, right? The balance is off. Or the players wiped it in one round. Because the numbers, in theory, like on page 273, the DMG, they're good numbers most of the time, but then you throw in these special abilities.
Yeah.
And the reality is that you need that testing, that data, right? Because Richard and Jeremy both come up with awesome powers. Sometimes they're so awesome that they change the challenge of the encounter.
Yeah, it's so true, right? Look at the Demi Lich is this amazing creature that is, has all of these amazing abilities and everything, and has 80 hit points. But because of all its abilities, it becomes like a CR 18 creature, which if you looked at that chart in the DMG, it should have probably about 200 to 300 more hit points than what it has, right? So yeah, I think that's such a true thing, is that playtesting really, really matters, especially for nailing the CR and fine-tuning all of those numbers and that sort of thing, which is great. What are your sorts of favorite monsters to design, Richard? Like, when you are given a list by Wolfgang, or when you're asked to pitch a few monsters, what do you find yourself typically gravitating towards? And it doesn't need to be a monster type. It could be, I just like things that are, that give me the willies, or whatever it is.
So when I picked my first lot, the ones that were sort of from Indian and Chinese and Japanese mythology really sort of stood out for me, because I've been interested in that sort of thing. I played Oriental Adventures for years, and I liked Al-Qadim. So anything from those kind of Eastern mythologies I was interested in. But also there were some Midgard, things with a Midgard connection. And because I'd worked on Blood Kingdom and the Wasted West and the Southlands chapters for the campaign setting, some of the monsters that were on the list kind of had connections to that. So there were these weird pillars, Lovecraftian pillars of Uxloon, which was a place in the Wasted West. So I thought, well, I have to write those up. And then there were a couple of vampires on there, and I'd done the Blood Kingdom, so I wanted to do those as well. And there were a couple of dwarves, and so Midgard stuff. And then I'm quite interested in things like a plot monster, so where the players interact with it, but they don't necessarily have a fight with it, or they might have a fight with it, but then they'll have an interesting role-playing encounter afterwards or during. So those kind of things appeal to me.
I like the idea of looking at a monster beyond the scope of combat, right? I think a lot of magical creatures or fantastic creatures in D&D do so much more than combat. The kobold's a great example, right?
Sure.
They're fun to murder. But
hey now,
murder by under piles of cash by contributing to their Kickstarters.
Yes.
But I think, right, their ability to lay traps, their ability to be sneaky and be scrappy and keep coming back and that sort of thing. There's a lot more to kobolds than just, hey, they're the guys we fight at level 1, right?
Yeah, I mean, if we can take an existing trope and expand it, that's always great. And that usually winds up in a lore section as a hook. And I think a lot of the reaction we got to Tome of Beasts, some of it was, oh my goodness, I just have so much more to play with as a DM now. And some of it was, hey, your lore sections really make me think, oh, I can fit this right in here because it's got a hook.
I like putting those things in, those little adventure hooks, story hooks, definitely. I like picking, when I'm choosing monsters for my campaign, those kind of things jump out at me. That's excellent.
Yeah. And of course, Jeremy's monsters are just vicious, nasty, and mean. He does all these demons, I think. I don't know.
Oh, yeah. Jeremy, is that your thing? Is demons your thing?
I don't know. I do enjoy them. It's funny that Richard mentioned Lovecraft because I think I tend to lean towards weird a lot too. The flavor monsters are really fun for me too. In fact, the first monster I did for Kobold was for their Monarch of Monsters competition several years ago.
Oh yeah, 3-4 years.
And that was the Zonka, which is a completely not combat monster. In fact, you could pretty much just walk in and smash it. But it was there for just flavor for gnomes or wizards who happen to have it. It was a little metal ball with legs that walks around and cleans up their living spaces and their laboratories. So I really enjoy that kind of stuff. Demons and devils are pretty fun though.
Yeah. There's always a variety in these things. Wolfgang, do you think there is a theme that sort of brings the monsters together, that makes them a distinctly sort of Kobold Press monster? For instance, I think we could say that, like, if someone were to pitch you a monster that was, a ridiculous circus clown or something, it likely would not end up in the book.
No. I have this fear of clowns. No, we tend to skew dark, right? I mean, Kobold Press and Midgard as a setting, it's dark fantasy. And so we lean that way. Not that there aren't good guys, but probably a little darker and creepier would be one thing. We do have a great love of our undead demons and devils, but I think that's every major fantasy. And I don't know. I don't think we're wildly different than sort of core D&D, but we tend to skew maybe a little more planar. I think it's the Planescape fan base that's always like, give us something, whatever, that works, right, on the chaotic planes, or give us some new demons or what have you. So, yeah, we're like 5 degrees off mainline D&D fantasy. But that 5 degrees is where all the weird, fun stuff happens, right?
Definitely. And I think, I do think that that's true, right? The dark fantasy is definitely there. And I think it's a fun place to go for that. And it's so expansive that you really have monsters for every occasion, right? There's definitely still things that are good and neutral and all that sort of thing.
There's all the classic sort of things that are like dungeony trap monsters or predators that are all about caverns. We love all of those classics. So we do some of those every time. The stuff that's lurking in the shadows. And then, I mean, part of what I'm trying to do as publisher and as like the lead on design here is say, well, in Tome of Beasts, we had a couple of obvious themes, like we did a bunch of Fae, and we did a bunch of clockwork stuff. So let's not hit those notes again in Creature Codex. Let's do different notes. But they also need to be things that are appealing to a broad audience, and that the designers we're working with, see on a list and say, that. Yeah, we're trying to change it up from time to time so that each monster manual has its own flavor.
Sure, which I'm sure gets harder the more monsters you put out, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is why monster manuals tend to run 4 or 5, and then like people stop doing them because the game system has as much as it can support.
And I do have to say that in our talks with Wolfgang, while coming up with all of this stuff, was there's this really great connection between monsters, because there's that always huge variety of different monsters coming out. But in the design process this time around, there was a lot of tying monsters to other monsters, which is great, because then you have these cultures of specific types of monsters that work together or are subservient to something higher up the food chain, stuff like that. And I always think that kind of flavor is really exciting.
And I think it's such an important part of monster design now. And that those connections and the stories and the hooks we're talking about, I feel like have become more important in the last several years, right? I think the emphasis on story, WotC's emphasis on story has certainly brought that back to the forefront. And I do think as a DM, it makes my life a lot easier when I think about like, oh, this monster's so cool. But if I try to do it on my own, it's like, cool, I made a Gary Gygax dungeon that has a shark in one room and a sand elemental in another, you know what I mean? Like, it feels weird and hodgepodgey. But when you have the story of, these are how these things are related, and I can sell this to my players, I love that. So what are those conversations like? And do you all get together for that? Is there like a big email chain? Hey, I'm working on this, and I think it would be great to tie this into your monster. Wolfgang, are you
I wish
facilitator?
there were. Well, I am sort of the facilitator saying, here's monster A, and I wish monster B connected to it, because I'm seeing the full spread of everything as it comes in. I wish there were more of all the freelancers on one secret forum somewhere. And we've tried that a couple times, and the conversation among like 5 people who are all pretty busy designing their own thing, it sometimes just kind of peters out, right? And the conversation is more interesting at the level of, here's everything. Here's what the playtester said. Here's the editor. Here's me as developer. I think, and I mean, Jeremy can correct me if I'm wrong. Mostly it's like a few other people say, hey, how about X? And good designers will just run with that, right? They'll say, oh, sure. You've got a hyena and a hyena demon, or you've got rats and bats, and I can make them work together. It doesn't take very much to get the ball rolling in those things. And I worry about over-connection, but I also ask designers to pitch me related sets. It comes in the opposite direction, right? John Sawatsky pitched me a set of ooze monsters. That's the current stretch goal on the Codex right now. And I'm like, ooze monsters, John? Really?
I'm intrigued by those.
Right. And my first reaction was, oh, come on. Some sort of ooze civilization. You are out of your mind. This will never fly. It's too weird.
Well, that sounds awesome.
Yeah, I'm like, and then the next words out of my mouth were, I really want to see you make this work, but, I need to see a pitch before I approve a set of 5 related ooze monsters. So you write it up and convince me, and I'm 100% on board. And I think he sent me the pitch, and I'm like, oh, it almost works. Now I'm invested, right? Now I want it. And so he hooked me with that pitch by like, it was like 80%, 90% of the way there. And now it's a stretch goal, right? I think they're fantastic. I'm not going to give too much away. I'm going to let him talk about it once it's funded, but it was just so out there and so weird and so in the tradition of D&D. It's like, what have we got? Well, we got tentacle monsters that eat your brains over here. Okay, what else you got? We got eyeball monsters. Great. What are those about? Well, some of them are undead and some of them are crime lords. Okay, great. What have you got? I've got ooze. Yeah. No, it's intergalactic, pan-dimensional, planar ooze. Oh, all right then. So yeah, we try to go out there with some stuff that isn't just sort of, it's a humanoid, it's a sort of standard giant, but things that have connections. And if designers show up with 3 related monsters, low, medium, high level, I usually say, wow, that's interesting. You've just, created an arc for any DM who picks up on that at low level.
Don't go anywhere. There's more Tabletop Babble coming up.
Hey everybody, James Introcaso here, co-creator of the Don't Split the Podcast Network with Rudy Basso, and I am so excited to tell you about our new podcast, DSPN Presents. DSPN Presents is one-shot actual plays, panels from conventions that we attend, pilots for new podcasts, and so much more. It's basically whatever we thought was a good idea to turn into a podcast that didn't fit on one of the other podcasts in the network. So I would love for you to check out DSPN Presents. There's some awesome actual play content that is up there right now. Go check it out wherever podcasts are sold or at don'tsplitthepodcastnetwork.com. All right, back to the show. How do you guys get your story hooks for monsters? Richard, where do you sort of, once you have your monster and you think, okay, this is what I'm going to create, how do you then think about what you're going to drop in to help DMs use their monsters?
Oh, that's difficult. I guess I just sort of think, particularly I've done a couple that are actually good creatures. So then I kind of thought, well, it's unlikely they're going to be fighting these. So for those ones, I had to think about how they would get used. And I sort of wrote stuff in there about, so I did the King of the Vultures, who's an animal lord, and he's an ally of the Monkey King. So that was one of the connections I put in there to something else that I didn't know the Monkey King was going to be in the book, but I thought it was a good bet. And I was writing about him, and I just thought, well, you know, this is like a big like a vulture animal lord, but how is he actually going to run into the characters? And I just kind of thought, well, he's going to be interested in the affairs of vultures and birds of prey, and also he's up on top of a mountain. He's going to know lots of stuff around what's going on in the world. So there's a hook there around characters maybe needing to go and seek him for his advice, and also him maybe wanting them to help with stuff to do with the environment of the birds of prey being destroyed and stuff like that. So I just kind of put these little adventure ideas in and just hope they work, you know?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I think it makes sense if you've written some adventures too, right? You think about, okay, how am I going to make this creature work? Or how am I going to, sometimes when you work with a publisher, you'll get a prompt that says the villain is X. And you think, okay, well, now I need to make X work, right? So I think that's a really, really great way to think about how you would use them and then sort of suggest it from there. What about you, Jeremy? Do you have any sort of special techniques you have for coming up with hooks, especially for creatures like you know, you were talking about creatures that aren't necessarily combat creatures. How do you sort of create those hooks for them?
So I always like to sit down and think about how I would use it again in a adventure kind of way. And if it doesn't have at least like a one-page dungeon quality to it, you know, if it can't be at least a side adventure, then probably isn't really worth the effort to do it. Because if it's not going to be interesting for the players to use or to encounter, then you don't really want to have that in your monster manual. So I always like to think about what, if I were to write a layer for this creature or have some kind of encounter with it, what would that be? And then with bigger creatures, how do they play out throughout a campaign rather than like a one session? So if you have a demon lord or some kind of celestial or a flavor creature that is helping them on their way or interacting with them, how does that work out in the long term also? So I had one campaign that was 4.5 years long, and it was all homebrew, and we had reoccurring demons that would come in and sabotage something they were doing and then pop back to a different realm. And so they were always there. And when we were coming up with those creatures, we knew why they were there, as well as like the how, which is the stats and all of that stuff. So if a creature doesn't have a good solid why, it's just kind of uninteresting to me.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's the big motivation. Is why use this creature? What is the point? James Hake talked about that that when he sits down to write, the first thing he asks himself is, so what, when he looks at a creature, which I think is a great question, right? Like, why is this important?
Right. And what's important to it, right? I mean, sometimes the hook for me is, what does this creature want in the world, right? Because we're usually thinking about, what do I want as a game master, or players are thinking about, how do I kill this thing and take its loot? But you can make a creature more interesting by saying what it wants in the world is X. It wants trees growing everywhere. It wants to extinguish all life. It wants, circus monkeys. It wants lots of circus monkeys. And whatever it is, that's often a path to a story hook.
That's very true, right? How does that creature sort of in its microcosm of the world affect its ultimate goal, right? Or the ultimate goal of the species or whatever.
Sure. With the understanding it's going to fail, but whatever, right? That's
sure. But I think I think there's something very human about that too, right?
Yeah. This is why I love talking monsters way better than the roaring, grunting, I'm just a killer monster.
Oh, yeah.
Very true. Very true. Although sometimes roaring, grunting, killing monsters are crocodiles that have their ribs shoot out of their stomach.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, all right. If I've had a bad week, I probably want the roary, chewy.
Do the oozes talk?
The oozes do talk.
Good.
I think they're telepathic.
Good.
I was trying to remember specifically, but I seem to remember they have some sort of telepathic thing.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So they're magnificent. They all, of course, are. Well, what's fun about them is they're so weird and so alien. Almost anything flies, right? Just once you realize that the oozes are talking and coordinating amongst themselves, I hope is a big holy crap moment for players, right? Because most oozes are solitary. They don't organize. They don't have a society.
They don't say a lot.
They don't say a lot, right? They're largely uninteresting. And this reverses all of that and says, you need to take us oozes seriously.
We need to fund this stretch goal.
That's what I love about John's designs is even when I don't think they work, and sometimes they don't, they're always fascinating, right? Like, oh yeah, that's interesting. But these definitely work.
He's the man. He's really, really great at coming up with weird and wonderful.
Yeah, like him for weird.
And speaking of weird and wonderful, we have some artists who really capture the weird and wonderful on this Kickstarter. And I think art is just as important in a monster book as design and story, and especially in the age of monster tokens and digital tokens and things like that. There are some really, really great artists who are working on this project. Let's talk a little bit about writing art orders. I think a lot of people out there who are designers or first-time designers might be asked to write an art order, and it's sort of hard to think about, like, where do I start? How much detail should I give? Is more better, but don't I want to give the artist some room to play? What's sort of the best way when you sit down to write an art order for something you've created? What's the best way to go about doing that?
I've done some for my own stuff, and I ended up with illustrations that were, while they weren't the image that was in my head, they were amazing renditions of something like what was in my head. So, I mean, I write quite a bit of detail. And I sometimes put pictures that I found online for stuff. So if it's a mythical monster, and some of the ones I've done, I've found some pictures of that mythical monster or statues of it and stuff like that. And I've included some of those, but I've maybe said things like, these wings look weird. I think the wings should be coming out the shoulder. But I mean, for stuff that's going to Wolfgang, I send that off to him and he sends it off to Mark. And then I don't know what conversation happens after that. They may well say, what a load of rubbish. Don't draw that. Do it totally differently. But I tend to put in as much description as I can, but maybe only a few lines, but then some pictures. And for some of the sort of Eastern monsters where they've got a type of, there's a Gada, which is a type of Indian club, I've kind of found a picture of it and put it there because it saves the artist the trouble of looking it up. And then when I write the text, hopefully then that's more likely to match what the artist comes up with, because I guess I don't want the editor to have to change like the weapon from a club to a sword or something if I've said something different. I don't know. So that's kind of how I approach it. I probably do maybe more than some people do. I don't know. Wolfgang would know.
Yeah, I mean, different people very much take it different ways, right? Some people want to make it an action scene with adventurers. I'm like, no, it's really just a single monster here. And some people want to stick close to source material. Other people are like, well, this is an original monster from my head and I picture it this way. And by and large, writers are good at describing things, right? I mean, that's part of design. So, do the artists get exactly what you mean out of text? Maybe not. But I tend to do what Richard does, which is paste in a picture if there's something strange or if there's some classic reference for it. Sometimes I'm not sure how helpful that is for the artist. Like the Cipactli is this Aztec water demon with mouths all over its body and a crocodilian kind of thing. And they're horrible. I had a great time writing them. They're going to be a nightmare for the artist to illustrate. It's like, well, how does the anatomy of multiple crocodile mouths work, right? Most creatures have one mouth, and that's enough. Gibbering mouthers, you don't want it to look like that. So how is the artist going to approach that? Well, as it turns out, the Aztecs drew some pictures of these things, but, they're faded frescoes from 600 years ago. So, and really, I'm not sure how much value you get out of that reference. But I try to share it when I've got it, and then I say, I think it's like this, and I will leave, like, composition and anatomy to the artist. What I find myself doing now, though, that I didn't used to do in art orders, is I'm way more particular about specifying color when possible. Because some artists will come back and they'll say, really got into the grays and browns on this monster. And I'm like, what? No, that looks terrible. That's going to print up as a blob of gray and brown. And so putting a little color in a monster, I think, makes it more visually interesting as a miniature, as a token on a VTT, anywhere, right? As an illustration in the book. But because a lot of natural animals are brown or gray or sort of drab colors, I think designers sometimes default to let's make it natural looking as opposed to let's make it fantastic looking. And color often signals this is a fantastic, weird, and wonderful monster, whereas gray and brown indicates it's some prey animal somewhere in the woods trying to hide.
Sure. Yeah, we've got this, as I'm sort of scrolling through the Kickstarter page, I can see these interesting splashes of color. There's an ant with a glowing green abdomen, dripping green acid from its jaws, right?
Yes.
I'm like, oh, hey, this abdomen's filled with acid. Look out. And we've got some cool dragons with amazing breath weapons and some snake people with magic in their hands and all kinds of cool stuff that really suggests high fantasy, which is great.
Right. I mean, that's what we're going for, right? I mean, pure realism. There are games that do it, but Dungeons and Dragons really isn't one of them. So let's not pretend that we're doing, Audubon bird illustrations. We're not. We're doing high fantasy. Let's make it bright. Let's make it interesting.
I don't know if this image is on the Kickstarter page, but Geek Dad had it on his blog post, the art for the Simurgh, which is one of my monsters. I'm very excited to see art for it.
Yes.
And the thing is just so brightly colored. I love it because it's supposed to be like a bird with a wolf head, and it's like huge. It's a gargantuan creature, if I remember right. And they could have easily have gone, with just gray or brown like a wolf, and it's like green and pink. I see pink in there. I think it looks fantastic.
Yeah, it's like the world's most terrifying parrot almost. That's really cool.
I have to check that out.
Yeah. No, I've gotten some terrific art, and a lot of it is the artists themselves. They tend to bring in, they want to make it interesting for themselves to work on. So they tend to bring ideas that take it beyond where the art brief lets off, and they're just running with it. I love that.
Yeah, exactly. It's great for them to have room to play. Jeremy, I think to your point, right, it might not be a thing you expect, but it could be a thing you love.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, I think the artist definitely has, it needs to have room to have a little license with what they're creating. And that gets them excited to do it. But as far as like writing the art orders, a lot of detail and pictures, if you have them, is great. Definitely have to chime in on seconding that motion.
Yeah, I am reminded I had a friend. I was an RA in college, and we would decorate each other's clipboards and then give them as presents to each other, which is some real bureaucratic stuff right there. But, so people would sort of write down, oh, these are the things I really love. And I had a friend who really loved the band Bush. And so he wrote that. And then got back a clipboard covered in pictures of George W. Bush, who was president at the time. So, he has to be specific. And include references where you can. But and there's some awesome stuff here. I mean, this two-headed bald eagle that is carrying a knight and looks like he's about to devour or drop him. This is the most American Revolution thing I've ever seen. It's amazing. So there's some really, really fun images in here. And like we said, the Kickstarter is just blowing through stretch goals. It is going to be a thing that is amazing. Kobold Press has already put out one of these, you're going to get the book. It's going to be great. Playtesting is starting in January. A lot of the monsters are already created. A lot of the art looks like it's underway. So the question is, what else can people expect? Because I have to say, I think Tome of Beasts might be one of the best, if not the best Kickstarter I've ever contributed to as far as return on investment went, because it hit so many stretch goals. I kept getting more stuff.
Well, we're at that. Yeah, we love giving more stuff. It's if we have the funding, why would we not make a better book or, do a cooler set of pawns, or, hey, let's add some.
Pawns were amazing.
Yes, we're doing those again, and battle maps and some layers because, hey, we don't want, if we can do another set of layers saying these are the monsters as the designers pictured them in their environment, great. So we're adding all of that. People can also expect, of course, every backer gets to submit a monster to the big pool if they so choose. And we've got some judges to go through hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of monster entries and pick out the top layer, and those will be published in the book. So, I mean, we just want to keep piling on the goodies. I think it's very much like Tome of Beasts in that we just want it to be big and playable and tested to the point where we're comfortable about it. We did get some feedback on the Tome of Beasts that some of the challenge ratings, the monsters are a little tougher than the ones in the monster manual are. The CR curve is slightly different. And I think that's just kobold meanness. But part of it is also the playtest results, where a lot of what we sent out early was my group stomped all over this. So we tended to say, we'll up the damage slightly. We'll be, a 6.5, but we'll call it a 6. I think that's great.
That's the right way around, I think.
I think that's the right way to err on this because, GMs come back and say, every time I get out that book, my players are like, oh, shit. These monsters aren't, we're not going to wipe the floor with this. Get ready.
Well, and I think the D&D monster manual, everybody knows how to play the game now, and everybody knows how to game the system. And so I think it is a different game than when it came out 3.5 years ago.
Right. Players have more options, right? I mean, hey, we've got Xanathars. I have a lot of other things. So
totally. And I think Volos is also an example of what you're talking about. There are creatures in Volos who I think would have higher CRs had they been in the monster manual. So it's interesting to see that trend. And I do love to make my players quake with fear by taking out the Tome of Beasts. It's the best.
But honestly, we scaled some monsters back. With playtest that came back and said TPK, 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 we just all right, we went too far. Dial it down.
Are there any that you can recall offhand from the Tome of Beasts that were TPK worthy?
My God, it's 2 years ago now, that playtest. I can't remember what it was that wiped the floor. There was something that managed to stay invisible and was a flying creature.
Oh, that's nasty.
And I was like, that is really mean and nasty. And it would be a shame to take away either flying or invisibility, but there needs to be some way to beat this thing. So that was one where it's how did that get past us the first time? But we were very glad to get the playtest results back. So an archer and no, it didn't work.
I'm going to set the Grim Jester on my players next time, and I think that one looks pretty tough.
Yeah.
I'm seeing how they do with it.
Yeah, it's somewhat complex to run, but I think it's worth it. It's worth it.
They also hate that sort of thing as well.
The whack-a-mole, we can't quite kill it.
Yeah.
So this has been an amazing conversation, and it's truly a great companion piece to the other conversation we had with Dan and Sean and James about monster design. But before we go, obviously we should mention one more time, the Kickstarter is the Creature Codex from Kobold Press. If you go to Kickstarter, you can find it there by searching for Creature Codex or Kobold Press. You could go to koboldpress.com or any of its various social media offerings, and you will find links to the Kickstarter there, or you can head on over to don'tsplitthepodcastnetwork.com. We have a link on every page. It's on the left-hand side. There's a big banner that says Tome of Beasts 2, and if you click on it, it will take you right there. So that is excellent. But other than those places, Wolfgang, where can people find you on the internet?
Oh, well, I tweet as Monkey King. I spend some time on Patreon doing the Warlock projects, and those are the two best places. I guess I'm more a Twitter person than a Facebook person these days. I don't know when that happened, but it did.
I know. It's where the RPG community is truly shouting at each other.
Yeah.
Twitter. Yeah. Yeah. It's really fun. It's a really fun, supportive community, actually.
It is.
It's great to check out. And where can people find you, Richard?
Well, I'm on Twitter at richgreen01, and I also have a website, passantium.com, for Passantium City at the Crossroads.
Excellent. Excellent. And what about you, Jeremy? Where can people find you?
Well, I'm also at Twitter. I'm on WH Pubs. And then on Facebook, I'm WH Publications. And then I have WHpublications.com, Wanderer's Haven. I have a blog on there where I do conversions of movie monsters into 5th edition and Call of Cthulhu and all that fun stuff. So,
ooh, movie monsters.
Yeah.
Fun IP violations. I love that stuff.
Well, if it's free, right? If you're just...
Yeah.
It is free, yeah.
No, it's totally fine. I just, I can't publish that, but I can certainly enjoy it.
Sounds great.
Could you make a tome of Hollywood beasts, and then you could just give them, slightly different names? Like Frank's Monster and Dracula, that kind of thing. Would that work?
Spider Boy and Dr. Right. Von Dumenstein.
Exactly. Yeah.
I don't think I want to go out on that ledge.
Well, thank you all so much for joining me today on Tabletop Babble.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Yeah, it was great.
That was an amazing conversation. Be sure to check out the Creature Codex from Kobold Press. You know, Tabletop Babble is still a new show. This is episode 51. We haven't even been around a full year yet, and we could use your help growing. How can you do that? How can you help us? Well, at no cost to you, hop onto iTunes, leave us a great review. Hey, even if you don't have iTunes, odds are your podcatcher app uses iTunes algorithms to rate and recommend podcasts. So go make a free account, take 30 seconds, review Tabletop Babble, and then review all of the other great podcasts you listen to, probably get for free. The hosts and producers and editors of those podcasts will love it. It is a great holiday gift to us. And to inspire you to do just that, I read one new 5-star review verbatim and credit the person who left it. Make me say anything you want with a 5-star review. Today's 5-star review, left on October 9th, my birthday, is from See What's in My Brain. It is entitled Best RPG Podcast Out There, which is some huge high praise that I don't know is necessarily true, but thank you so much, See What's in My Brain. Their review reads, James Introcaso is an excellent host. It feels like you are sitting, chatting with a couple of friends, which is just a nod to his skill as a host. He comes off as casual, but knows his topics cold, interviews like a pro, and tackles many topics on the show that newbie and hardcore gamers alike want to know about. Can't recommend this podcast enough. Thank you so much for this review. This really made my day. See what's in my brain? I have seen what's in your brain, and I really like it. People, I want to take the time to remind you that the holidays are coming up. And if you head on over to don'tsplitthepodcastnetwork.com and use our Amazon affiliate link, it's a banner over on the left-hand side of every single page in the site. Just click on it, shop as you normally would on Amazon or Drive-Thru RPG, and then guess what? We get a couple pennies from your sale. It would really help us out. So remember, go to don'tsplitthepodcastnetwork.com, click on the Amazon banner. Once you get there, maybe even save it as a bookmark so you don't need to go to don'tsplitthepodcastnetwork.com. And you can just automatically go, boom, and every time you shop, you're helping us out. Thank you so much. If you want to check out what I'm doing, you can read all about my game design adventures over at worldbuilderblog.com. Tabletop Babble is a show on the Don't Split the Podcast Network. Thanks to Rudy Basso for founding it with me. Our theme music, which you're listening to right now, was provided by Battle Bards. Remember that RPGs are like sex. Even flumps can participate. Hey everybody, just wanted to let you know all about our sponsor for this podcast of Tabletop Babble. I'm talking about Kobold Press. Kobold Press, of course, as you heard in this podcast, has launched the Kickstarter for the 5e Creature Codex, which is a sequel to the amazing and well-received Tome of Beasts. It is my favorite 5th edition book. It is awesome. And the Creature Codex will be hardcover and beautiful art just like the Tome of Beasts, and it brings you more than 300 new monsters in 5th edition, including Lotus Golems, Wasteland Dragons, Shadow Goblins, and all of the amazing things you heard us talk about in the podcast previous. They are blowing through stretch goals and backer goals. This is going to be a massive project. It will be the gift that keeps on giving. So go give a gift to yourself or get ready for the holidays coming up. Maybe give a gift to someone in the future. That's right, get planning a year ahead and make a pledge for the Creature Codex over at Kickstarter.com. You can search for Creature Codex, or you can search for Kobold Press, or you can head on over to Don'tSplitThePodcastNetwork.com and click on the banner on the left-hand side of the page that says Tome of Beasts 2 and has a picture of a real awesome, scary lich. Go to Kickstarter, become a backer of the Creature Codex. You will not regret it.